Question 1. The monitoring system demonstrates that a licensed individual is carrying a handgun in a holster while walking through a public park in Dallas, Texas. The individual is not displaying the handgun in a manner that would cause alarm, nor are they entering any clearly posted prohibited areas. Considering the Texas Penal Code, what is the most appropriate course of action for the individual in this scenario? Option A. Continue carrying the handgun discreetly in the holster, as this is generally permissible in public parks in Texas, provided no specific prohibitions are violated. Option B. Immediately remove the handgun from the holster and conceal it under clothing, even though it is in a holster, to avoid any potential perception of threat. Option C. Approach park officials and inquire if carrying a handgun is permitted in this specific park, even though it is a public space. Option D. Leave the park immediately and return home to store the handgun, as carrying in public spaces can be unpredictable. Correct answer is A. Continue carrying the handgun discreetly in the holster, as this is generally permissible in public parks in Texas, provided no specific prohibitions are violated. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to balance their right to carry a handgun for self-defense with the responsibility to act lawfully and avoid creating unnecessary alarm or potential conflict. The core of the challenge lies in interpreting the intent and application of Texas Penal Code, specifically regarding the lawful carrying of a handgun and the circumstances under which it might be perceived as a threat. Careful judgment is required to ensure actions are compliant with the law and do not escalate a situation. The best approach involves discreetly carrying the handgun in a manner that is compliant with Texas law, specifically Texas Penal Code Chapter 46, and avoiding any actions that could be construed as threatening or provocative. This means ensuring the handgun is carried in a holster and not openly displayed in a manner that would cause alarm. The individual should also be aware of prohibited places as outlined in Texas Penal Code Section 46.03 and Section 46.035. By adhering to these provisions, the individual exercises their right to carry while minimizing the risk of misinterpretation or legal complications. This approach prioritizes lawful conduct and de-escalation. An incorrect approach would be to openly display the handgun, even if it is legally carried in a holster. This action directly contravenes the spirit and often the letter of laws designed to prevent public alarm and potential escalation of violence. While Texas law permits carrying a handgun, it does not grant a right to brandish it or carry it in a manner that causes reasonable apprehension of harm. Another incorrect approach would be to carry the handgun into a location where it is explicitly prohibited by Texas Penal Code Section 46.03 or Section 46.035, such as a polling place on Election Day or a high school sporting event. This is a clear violation of the law, regardless of how discreetly the handgun is carried. Finally, carrying the handgun without a Texas license to carry, LTC, in a manner that is not covered by a specific exception to the handgun-free zone laws would also be a violation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding and strict adherence to the specific statutes governing the carrying of handguns in Texas. This involves a thorough review of the Texas Penal Code, particularly Chapter 46, and any relevant administrative rules from the Texas Department of Public Safety. For carrying a handgun in any public setting, an individual should confirm their understanding of prohibited locations and the legal requirements for carrying, including the use of a holster. If there is any doubt about the legality or appropriateness of carrying in a particular situation, the safest and most responsible decision is to err on the side of caution and not carry the handgun, or to seek clarification from legal counsel or the relevant authorities. Question 2. What factors determine whether a Texas license to carry holder may lawfully carry a handgun into a room where a governmental body is conducting a meeting open to the public? Option A. Whether the license to carry holder believes they need to carry a handgun for personal protection in that specific meeting. Option B. Whether other license to carry holders are observed carrying handguns in similar meetings. Option C. Whether the room is clearly posted with a sign indicating that handguns are prohibited. Option D. Whether the Texas Government Code explicitly prohibits carrying a handgun in such a location, regardless of signage. The correct answer is D. Whether the Texas Government Code explicitly prohibits carrying a handgun in such a location, regardless of signage. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to understand the nuances of Texas law regarding the carrying of handguns in specific locations, balancing individual rights with public safety concerns and legal restrictions. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with the Texas Government Code, specifically Chapter 411, Subchapter H, which governs the license to carry a handgun. The best professional approach involves a thorough understanding of the Texas Government Code, specifically identifying prohibited places for carrying a handgun, even with a valid license to carry. This approach prioritizes adherence to the letter of the law as defined by the Texas legislature. It requires the applicant to actively seek out and internalize the specific prohibitions outlined in the statute, such as those pertaining to polling places on Election Day, within 1,000 feet of a place of execution on the day of an execution, or in any room where a governmental body is conducting a meeting open to the public. This is correct because the license to carry is not a blanket authorization to carry a handgun anywhere. It is subject to numerous statutory exceptions and prohibitions designed to maintain public order and safety in sensitive locations. An incorrect approach would be to assume that a license to carry automatically permits carrying a handgun in all locations not explicitly marked with a 30.06 or 30.07 sign. This is a common misconception and a significant legal failure. The Texas Government Code lists specific prohibited locations that do not require signage to be enforced. Relying solely on signage ignores the statutory prohibitions, potentially leading to criminal charges. Another incorrect approach is to rely on anecdotal information or the practices of others regarding carrying handguns in specific locations. Personal opinions or the actions of fellow license holders do not supersede Texas law. This approach is ethically and legally flawed as it outsources legal interpretation to unreliable sources, disregarding the applicant's personal responsibility to know and follow the law. A further incorrect approach would be to interpret the license to carry as granting discretion to carry a handgun in any location where the applicant feels it is necessary for self-defense, regardless of statutory restrictions. While the purpose of the license is to allow for lawful carry, this discretion is limited by the specific prohibitions and requirements of the Texas Government Code. This approach disregards the legislative intent behind the restrictions, which are based on public policy considerations beyond individual perceived need. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a commitment to understanding and adhering to the specific statutes governing the license to carry in Texas. This involves consulting the official Texas Government Code, seeking clarification from official sources when necessary, and prioritizing legal compliance over assumptions or hearsay. The framework should emphasize a proactive approach to learning the law, rather than a reactive one based on signage or the actions of others. Question: what factors determine whether a Texas license to carry holder may lawfully carry a handgun into a room where a governmental body is conducting a meeting open to the public? Options: A. Whether the Texas Government Code explicitly prohibits carrying a handgun in such a location, regardless of signage. B. Whether the room is clearly posted with a sign indicating that handguns are prohibited. C. Whether other license to carry holders are observed carrying handguns in similar meetings. D. Whether the license to carry holder believes they need to carry a handgun for personal protection in that specific meeting. Question 3. Quality control measures reveal that a Texas resident is considering carrying a handgun under a license to carry, LTC, but is unsure if they fully meet all the legal requirements. They have heard conflicting opinions from various sources about what constitutes eligibility. Which of the following approaches best reflects the professional and legally compliant decision-making process for this individual in Texas? Option A. Proceed with carrying a handgun based on a strong personal belief in the necessity for self-defense, even if a formal review of all legal eligibility criteria has not been completed. Option B. Thoroughly review the specific statutory requirements for a Texas license to carry a handgun as outlined in the Texas Government Code, Chapter 411, Subchapter H, and objectively assess personal qualifications against each criterion. Option C. Rely on the advice of friends and family members who have experience with firearms and may have a general understanding of Texas gun laws. Option D. Assume eligibility for carrying a handgun if one has not been convicted of any felony offenses, as this is the primary disqualifier. The correct answer is B. Thoroughly review the specific statutory requirements for a Texas license to carry a handgun as outlined in the Texas Government Code, Chapter 411, Subchapter H, and objectively assess personal qualifications against each criterion. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance their personal beliefs and potential biases with the strict legal requirements of carrying a handgun in Texas. The core of the challenge lies in ensuring that the decision to carry is based solely on the legal qualifications and not influenced by subjective interpretations or external pressures that could lead to a violation of Texas law. Careful judgment is required to uphold the integrity of the license to carry, LTC system, and public safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough and objective self-assessment against the explicit eligibility criteria outlined in the Texas Government Code, Chapter 411, Subchapter H, concerning the license to carry a handgun. This approach is correct because it directly adheres to the statutory requirements for obtaining and maintaining an LTC. The law mandates that an applicant must meet specific age, residency, mental competency, and criminal history prerequisites. By focusing solely on these objective, legally defined criteria, an individual ensures their decision to carry is compliant with Texas statutes, thereby upholding the legal framework designed to ensure responsible handgun possession. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves relying on informal advice or personal interpretations of the law from friends or acquaintances. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses the official legal requirements and can lead to misinterpretations of eligibility. Texas law is specific, and informal advice is not a substitute for understanding the statutory provisions, potentially resulting in carrying a handgun without a valid license or in violation of its terms. Another incorrect approach is to assume that because one has never been convicted of a disqualifying crime, they are automatically eligible. This is professionally unacceptable because eligibility for an LTC in Texas is multifaceted and extends beyond just criminal convictions. It includes requirements related to mental competency, residency, age, and the absence of certain protective orders, all of which must be met. Overlooking these other critical legal prerequisites can lead to an unlawful carrying of a handgun. A further incorrect approach is to base the decision to carry on a perceived need for self-defense without first confirming legal eligibility. While the desire for self-defense is a common motivation for seeking an LTC, Texas law requires strict adherence to the eligibility criteria regardless of perceived need. Proceeding to carry without a valid license, even with a strong belief in the need for it, constitutes a violation of Texas statutes. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Texas seeking to carry a handgun under an LTC should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance above all else. This framework involves 1. Identifying the specific statutory requirements for an LTC in Texas. 2. Conducting an honest and objective self-evaluation against each of these legal criteria. 3. Seeking clarification from official sources, such as the Texas Department of Public Safety, DPS, or legal counsel, if any aspect of the requirements is unclear. 4. Only proceeding with carrying a handgun after confirming full compliance with all legal mandates. This systematic, legally grounded approach ensures responsible and lawful handgun possession. Question 4. Process analysis reveals that a Texas license to carry a handgun holder is driving and observes a heated verbal altercation between two individuals in a public park. The individuals appear agitated, and one is gesturing aggressively. What is the most appropriate course of action for the LTC holder in this situation? Option A. Immediately approach the individuals, draw their handgun, and issue verbal commands to cease their argument. Option B. Position oneself to be able to intervene if the situation escalates, while also calling law enforcement. Option C. Walk directly towards the individuals to verbally mediate the dispute and encourage them to calm down. Option D. Maintain a safe distance. Observe the situation for any immediate threats of serious bodily harm or death, and contact law enforcement to report the disturbance. Correct answer is D. Maintain a safe distance. Observe the situation for any immediate threats of serious bodily harm or death, and contact law enforcement to report the disturbance. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance their right to carry a handgun in Texas with the responsibility to act ethically and legally when encountering a situation that could escalate. The core challenge lies in discerning when a situation necessitates intervention and what level of intervention is permissible and advisable under Texas law, specifically concerning the license to carry (LTC) requirements. Misjudgment could lead to legal repercussions, endanger oneself or others, or violate the principles of responsible gun ownership. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves prioritizing de-escalation and observation while maintaining a safe distance and only intervening if there is an immediate and unavoidable threat of serious bodily harm or death to oneself or another person, and if intervention is legally permissible and tactically sound. This approach aligns with the Texas Penal Code's provisions on self-defense and defense of others, which require a reasonable belief that such force is immediately necessary. It also reflects the ethical obligation of an LTC holder to act with restraint and avoid unnecessary escalation, focusing on personal safety and the safety of others without assuming the role of law enforcement. The Texas LTC curriculum emphasizes responsible gun ownership, which includes understanding the legal and ethical boundaries of using force. Incorrect approaches analysis. Intervening immediately by drawing a handgun and issuing verbal commands, even if the intent is to deter further conflict, is an incorrect approach. This action can be perceived as aggressive, potentially escalating the situation and creating an immediate threat where one might not have existed. It also bypasses opportunities for de-escalation and could be interpreted as an unlawful display of a firearm under Texas law if not justified by an immediate threat. Approaching the individuals directly to verbally mediate the dispute, without assessing the potential for violence or the presence of weapons, is also an incorrect approach. While well-intentioned, this puts the individual in close proximity to a potentially volatile situation, increasing personal risk and potentially drawing them into the conflict in a way that is not legally protected by self-defense statutes unless an immediate threat arises. Contacting law enforcement and observing from a safe distance until authorities arrive is a prudent step, but choosing to do so while simultaneously attempting to position oneself to intervene if the situation deteriorates further is a flawed approach. The primary focus should be on ensuring personal safety and allowing trained professionals to handle the situation. Attempting to maintain a position for potential intervention while also ensuring safety can lead to divided attention and increased risk. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes situational awareness, risk assessment, and adherence to legal statutes. This involves 1. Observe and assess. Continuously evaluate the environment and the actions of individuals involved. 2. Prioritize personal safety. Maintain a safe distance and avoid unnecessary engagement. 3. De-escalate if possible and safe. If a safe opportunity arises, non-confrontational communication might be considered, but only if it does not increase risk. 4. Legal justification. Understand the specific Texas laws regarding the use of force and the defense of self and others. 5. Contact authorities. Report the situation to law enforcement and allow them to manage the incident. 6. Act only when legally and tactically justified. Intervention with a firearm should only occur as a last resort when there is an immediate and unavoidable threat of serious bodily harm or death, and such action is legally permissible and tactically sound. Question 5. Quality control measures reveal that an applicant for a Texas license to carry a handgun, LTC, has a past arrest for a misdemeanor offense that was dismissed by the court several years ago. The applicant believes this dismissal means it is not a disqualifying factor and has not disclosed it on their application. Based on the Texas Government Code, Chapter 411, Subchapter H, what is the most appropriate course of action for the applicant regarding this past arrest? Option A. Thoroughly research the specific Texas Government Code provisions related to dismissed misdemeanor offenses and their impact on LTC eligibility, and if any doubt remains, proactively contact the Texas Department of Public Safety for clarification or seek legal counsel. Option B. Ignore the past arrest, believing it is too minor and too long ago to be relevant to their current application for a Texas license to carry a handgun. Option C. Rely on the advice of a friend who also has an LTC and was told that dismissed arrests are never an issue for licensing. Option D. Assume that a dismissed arrest is not a disqualifying factor and proceed with the application without disclosing it, as it did not result in a conviction. The correct answer is A. Thoroughly research the specific Texas Government Code provisions related to dismissed misdemeanor offenses and their impact on LTC eligibility, and if any doubt remains, proactively contact the Texas Department of Public Safety for clarification or seek legal counsel. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an applicant to navigate a situation where their personal circumstances might conflict with the strict requirements for obtaining a Texas license to carry a handgun, LTC. The challenge lies in accurately assessing whether a past legal issue, even if seemingly minor or resolved, could impact their eligibility under Texas law. Careful judgment is required to avoid providing incomplete or misleading information, which could have serious consequences. The best professional approach involves a thorough and honest self-assessment of all past interactions with law enforcement and the legal system, followed by diligent research into how those specific circumstances are treated under the Texas Government Code, Chapter 411, Subchapter H, License to carry a handgun. This includes understanding the definitions of disqualifying offenses and the look-back periods. If there is any ambiguity or concern, the applicant should proactively seek clarification from the Texas Department of Public Safety, DPS, or consult with legal counsel specializing in firearms law in Texas. This proactive and transparent approach ensures compliance with the law and demonstrates a commitment to responsible gun ownership. An incorrect approach would be to assume that a past arrest or citation that did not result in a conviction is automatically irrelevant. Texas law defines certain offenses that can be disqualifying, and the mere fact of an arrest, even if charges were dropped or dismissed, can be a disqualifying factor depending on the nature of the offense and the specific provisions of the Texas Government Code. Failing to disclose such an event, or misrepresenting its significance, constitutes a violation of the application requirements and could lead to denial of the license or revocation if granted. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on the advice of friends or informal sources regarding eligibility. While well-intentioned, such advice may not be legally accurate or up-to-date with current Texas statutes and DPS interpretations. The Texas Government Code is the definitive source, and informal opinions can lead to misinterpretations of the law, resulting in an incomplete or inaccurate application. Finally, an incorrect approach is to ignore past legal issues altogether, believing they are too minor to matter. The application process requires disclosure of all relevant information. The DPS has the authority to investigate and verify the information provided. Omitting any potentially disqualifying information, regardless of the applicant's perception of its severity, is a direct violation of the application's integrity and can have severe repercussions. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes accuracy, transparency, and adherence to the specific legal requirements of Texas. This involves 1. Understanding the specific legal framework, Texas Government Code, Chapter 411, Subchapter H. 2. Conducting a comprehensive self-review of all relevant past events. 3. Verifying the legal implications of those events against the statute. 4. Seeking official clarification or legal advice when in doubt. 5. Disclosing all information truthfully and completely on the application. Question 6. Quality control measures reveal that an applicant for a Texas license to carry a handgun, LTC, has a past arrest for a misdemeanor offense that was later dismissed by the court. The applicant believes that since the charges were dismissed, it is not relevant to their application and is considering not mentioning it on the official application form. Which of the following approaches best reflects the required professional conduct and adherence to Texas law? Option A. Consult with a friend who also has an LTC to determine if the dismissed charge needs to be reported. Option B. Only disclose the arrest without mentioning that the charges were dismissed, hoping the DPS will interpret it favorably. Option C. Omit the arrest from the application, assuming that a dismissed charge will not be discovered and is not a disqualifying factor. Option D. Fully and accurately disclose the arrest and the subsequent dismissal of charges on the LTC application, providing any necessary supporting documentation. The correct answer is D. Fully and accurately disclose the arrest and the subsequent dismissal of charges on the LTC application, providing any necessary supporting documentation. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an applicant to navigate a situation where their personal circumstances might conflict with the strict requirements for obtaining a Texas license to carry a handgun, LTC. The applicant's past behavior, even if seemingly minor or resolved, could be interpreted by the Texas Department of Public Safety, DPS, as indicative of a disqualifying condition. Careful judgment is required to ensure the application process is handled with complete honesty and transparency, as any misrepresentation can have severe consequences. The correct approach involves proactively disclosing all relevant information to the Texas DPS, even if the applicant believes it is not disqualifying or has been resolved. This demonstrates a commitment to honesty and allows the DPS to make an informed decision based on all facts. Specifically, the applicant should fully and accurately detail the past arrest and the subsequent dismissal of charges on their LTC application. This aligns with Texas Government Code Section 411-174, which requires applicants to provide truthful information and can lead to denial or revocation if false information is provided. By disclosing, the applicant adheres to the spirit of the law, which aims to ensure that only individuals who meet the statutory requirements are licensed. An incorrect approach would be to omit the arrest from the application, assuming that because the charges were dismissed, it is not relevant or will not be discovered. This failure to disclose is a direct violation of the requirement for truthful and complete information on the application. Texas Government Code Section 411-174 explicitly states that an applicant is ineligible if they have been convicted of a felony or certain misdemeanors, and while a dismissal is not a conviction, the DPS has the discretion to review the circumstances of arrests, even those that did not result in a conviction, to assess an applicant's suitability. Omitting this information can lead to the denial of the application or, if discovered later, the revocation of a license and potential criminal penalties for making a false statement. Another incorrect approach would be to only disclose the arrest but not the fact that the charges were dismissed, or to provide a misleading explanation that downplays the event without full context. This lack of clarity and completeness can create suspicion and lead the DPS to assume the worst, potentially resulting in denial. The goal is to provide a clear, factual, and comprehensive account that allows the DPS to assess the situation accurately. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to seek advice from an unlicensed individual or to rely on informal opinions about whether the arrest needs to be disclosed. The application process is governed by specific Texas statutes and DPS rules, and only official guidance or legal counsel specializing in Texas firearms law should be consulted for definitive advice. Professionals should approach such situations by prioritizing absolute honesty and thoroughness in all interactions with licensing authorities. This involves carefully reviewing all application requirements, understanding the potential implications of past events, and erring on the side of disclosure when in doubt. A decision-making framework should include 1. Understanding the legal requirements. Familiarize oneself with the specific statutes and regulations governing the license. 2. Full disclosure. Be transparent and provide all requested information, even if it seems minor or resolved. 3. Seeking official guidance. If unsure about disclosure, consult the relevant licensing agency or qualified legal counsel. 4. Honesty as paramount. Recognize that any attempt to conceal or misrepresent information can have severe and lasting consequences. Question 7. The evaluation methodology shows that a Texas Department of Public Safety, DPS, licensing specialist is reviewing an application for a license to carry a handgun. The applicant has submitted all standard forms, but a review of their submitted handgun proficiency certificate reveals it was issued over 2 years ago, and the applicant has a minor misdemeanor conviction from 5 years ago that was reportedly expunged. Though the expungement documentation is not immediately clear, the specialist feels the applicant is likely a responsible individual based on their demeanor during a brief phone call. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing specialist to take in Texas? Option A. Deny the application immediately due to the outdated proficiency certificate and the unclear expungement status, as these represent clear violations of licensing requirements. Option B. Forward the application to a supervisor with a note recommending approval, highlighting the applicant's positive demeanor and the minor nature of the past conviction. Option C. Approve the application, assuming the older proficiency certificate is still valid and the expunged conviction poses no current risk, given the applicant's demeanor. Option D. Request updated documentation for handgun proficiency and seek official confirmation of the expungement of the misdemeanor conviction before proceeding with the application review. The correct answer is D. Request updated documentation for handgun proficiency and seek official confirmation of the expungement of the misdemeanor conviction before proceeding with the application review. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that this scenario is professionally challenging due to the inherent tension between an individual's right to carry a handgun for self-defense and the responsibility to ensure public safety by adhering strictly to the Texas license to carry a handgun, LTC laws. The challenge lies in interpreting and applying the nuanced provisions of the Texas Government Code, specifically Chapter 411, Subchapter H, which governs LTC eligibility and conduct. A careful judgment is required to navigate situations where an individual's actions, even if seemingly minor, could potentially violate the spirit or letter of the law, leading to legal repercussions or compromising the integrity of the LTC system. The approach that represents best professional practice involves a thorough and objective assessment of all available information, prioritizing verifiable facts and direct evidence over assumptions or hearsay. This includes meticulously reviewing the applicant's background, ensuring all required documentation is present and accurate, and confirming compliance with all statutory requirements for licensure. Specifically, this approach would involve confirming that the applicant has successfully completed the required LTC training course from a certified instructor, passed the written and proficiency tests, and meets all eligibility criteria outlined in Texas Government Code Section 411. 172, such as being at least 21 years old, not being a convicted felon, and not having certain mental health adjudications. This method is correct because it is grounded in the explicit legal mandates of the Texas LTC program, ensuring that decisions are fair, consistent, and legally defensible, thereby upholding public trust and safety. An approach that involves overlooking minor discrepancies in an applicant's submitted documentation, such as a slightly outdated training certificate, due to a belief that the applicant is otherwise a responsible individual, represents a significant regulatory failure. This is because Texas Government Code Section 411, 174 explicitly requires that all documentation submitted for an LTC application be current and meet specific standards. Failing to adhere to these documentation requirements undermines the integrity of the licensing process and could potentially lead to the issuance of a license to an individual who does not fully meet the current statutory qualifications. Another incorrect approach is to deny an application based solely on unsubstantiated rumors or anonymous tips regarding the applicant's character, without conducting a thorough investigation to verify the claims. Texas law requires a basis in fact and evidence for any denial of an LTC. Relying on hearsay or unverified allegations violates due process and the principles of fairness inherent in administrative licensing procedures. Finally, an approach that prioritizes expediency over accuracy by approving an application without confirming the applicant's eligibility for handgun proficiency, as mandated by Texas Government Code Section 411. 173 is also professionally unacceptable. This failure to verify a critical statutory requirement could result in a license being issued to someone who has not demonstrated the necessary skills to safely handle a handgun, posing a direct risk to public safety. The professional decision-making framework for similar situations should involve a commitment to due diligence, a thorough understanding of the relevant statutes and regulations, and an objective, evidence-based approach. Professionals must always act within the bounds of the law, ensuring that every decision is supported by verifiable facts and adheres to the specific requirements of the Texas license to carry a handgun program. When in doubt, seeking clarification from legal counsel or supervisory personnel is paramount. Question 8. The efficiency study reveals that a Texas license to carry, LTC, holder has recently moved to a new residence within Texas, but has not yet updated their address with the Texas Department of Public Safety, DPS. The individual continues to carry their handgun responsibly in accordance with Texas law at their new location. Which of the following actions best upholds the legal requirements of a Texas LTC holder in this situation? Option A. Assume that since the handgun is still being carried legally, the address change notification is not immediately critical. Option B. Only update the address with the Texas DPS if specifically requested by a law enforcement officer. Option C. Wait for 6 months to update the address with the Texas DPS to consolidate administrative tasks. Option D. Immediately submit a written notification to the Texas Department of Public Safety, DPS, detailing the new residential address within the legally mandated timeframe. The correct answer is D. Immediately submit a written notification to the Texas Department of Public Safety, DPS, detailing the new residential address within the legally mandated timeframe. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a common challenge in maintaining compliance with Texas license to carry LTC regulations when individuals transition between different living situations. The core of this scenario lies in the legal requirement for LTC holders to notify the Texas Department of Public Safety, DPS, of any changes in their address. This requirement is not merely administrative. It ensures that law enforcement can accurately identify the legal holder of a handgun license, which is crucial for public safety and effective law enforcement operations. Failure to update an address can lead to misunderstandings, potential legal complications for the licensee, and hinder the DPS's ability to maintain accurate records. The best approach involves proactively and accurately updating the address with the Texas DPS. This directly addresses the legal obligation under Texas Government Code Section 411-185, which mandates that an LTC holder must notify the department in writing of a change of address within 30 days of the change. This approach ensures immediate compliance, maintains the validity of the license, and prevents potential legal repercussions. It demonstrates a commitment to responsible gun ownership and adherence to state law. An incorrect approach would be to assume that because the physical handgun is not being carried at the new location, the address change notification is unnecessary. This fails to recognize that the LTC is tied to the individual's legal residency as registered with the state, regardless of whether the handgun is actively carried. Texas Government Code Section 411-185 clearly states the requirement to notify of an address change, not a change in carrying habits. Another incorrect approach is to wait an extended period, such as 6 months, before updating the address. This violates the explicit 30-day notification period stipulated by Texas law. Such a delay creates a period of noncompliance, potentially leading to issues if the licensee were to interact with law enforcement during that time. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to only update the address if specifically asked by law enforcement. This is a reactive and insufficient strategy. The legal obligation to notify the DPS is a proactive duty of the licensee, not contingent on being prompted by an authority. Relying on law enforcement to initiate the address update process is a failure to meet the statutory requirements and could result in penalties. Professionals should adopt a proactive and diligent approach to maintaining their LTC status. This involves understanding the specific notification requirements of Texas law, such as address changes, and adhering to the stipulated timelines. A good decision-making framework includes regularly reviewing personal circumstances against legal obligations and taking immediate action to ensure compliance, rather than waiting for potential issues to arise. Question 9. The evaluation methodology shows that a Texas resident has applied for a license to carry a handgun, LTC. During the application process, the applicant disclosed an arrest for a misdemeanor offense that occurred within the last 3 years. The applicant states that the charges were later dismissed and no conviction resulted. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Texas Department of Public Safety, DPS, in evaluating this application? Option A. Conduct a thorough review of the arrest record and the circumstances surrounding the dismissal to determine if the applicant meets the eligibility requirements under Texas law, considering the licensing authority's discretion. Option B. Request additional character references from the applicant to offset the information about the arrest. Option C. Deny the application solely based on the fact that an arrest occurred within the specified timeframe, regardless of the dismissal. Option D. Automatically approve the application, because the applicant was not convicted of the offense. Correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough review of the arrest record and the circumstances surrounding the dismissal to determine if the applicant meets the eligibility requirements under Texas law, considering the licensing authority's discretion. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that this scenario is professionally challenging due to the inherent tension between an individual's right to self-defense and the legal requirements for carrying a handgun in public. The applicant's past behavior, while not resulting in a conviction, raises concerns about their judgment and temperament, which are critical factors in determining suitability for a Texas license to carry a handgun, LTC. A thorough and objective assessment is paramount to uphold public safety while respecting individual rights. The best approach involves a comprehensive review of all submitted documentation, including the applicant's self-reported history and any supporting evidence. This approach prioritizes adherence to the Texas Government Code, specifically Chapter 411, Subchapter H, which outlines the eligibility requirements for an LTC. This includes a thorough examination of any arrests, even those that did not lead to conviction, as the licensing authority has the discretion to deny an application if the applicant has been arrested for certain offenses within the preceding 5 years, regardless of the outcome. The focus is on the applicant's overall history and potential risk to public safety, as determined by the licensing authority's review of the totality of the circumstances. This aligns with the legislative intent to ensure that only responsible individuals are licensed to carry handguns. An incorrect approach would be to automatically approve the application solely because the applicant states they were not convicted. This fails to acknowledge the licensing authority's statutory discretion to consider arrests and the potential implications for public safety. Another incorrect approach is to deny the application solely based on the arrest, without a thorough review of the circumstances surrounding the arrest and the applicant's subsequent conduct. This could be an overreach of authority and potentially violate the applicant's rights if the arrest was minor or unrelated to violent behavior. Finally, an approach that relies on anecdotal information or personal bias rather than the established legal framework and documented evidence would be professionally unacceptable. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the governing statutes and regulations. This involves meticulously reviewing all submitted materials, conducting necessary background checks, and evaluating the applicant's history against the statutory eligibility criteria. When ambiguities or concerns arise, professionals should seek clarification or further information, always prioritizing objective evidence and legal compliance over subjective opinions or assumptions. The ultimate goal is to make a fair and informed decision that upholds both public safety and the integrity of the licensing process. Question 10. The evaluation methodology shows that a Texas license to carry, LTC, applicant Mr. John Smith is submitting his application and needs to demonstrate handgun proficiency. His records indicate he completed an approved LTC course 30 months ago, firing 50 rounds during the course. Since then, he has practiced at a range on 3 separate occasions, firing 20 rounds each time. Assuming the Texas Penal Code requires a minimum of 100 practice rounds fired within the 60 months preceding the application to demonstrate proficiency, and that each practice session counts towards this total, what is the total number of practice rounds Mr. Smith has fired that are relevant to his current application? Option A, 50 rounds. Option B, 110 rounds. Option C, 100 rounds. Option D, 70 rounds. Correct answer is B, 110 rounds. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that scenarios involving the calculation of required handgun proficiency practice are professionally challenging due to the need for precise adherence to Texas Penal Code requirements and the potential for misinterpretation of the law. Applicants must demonstrate a clear understanding of the minimum practice rounds required to maintain proficiency, and any deviation can lead to disqualification. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the practice regimen meets the statutory minimums and is accurately documented. The best professional approach involves accurately calculating the total number of practice rounds required based on the Texas Penal Code, specifically focusing on the minimum number of rounds fired within the preceding 60 months for handgun proficiency. This approach directly addresses the legal mandate for demonstrating proficiency. The Texas Penal Code, Section 46.035a(2), outlines the requirements for demonstrating handgun proficiency, which includes firing a minimum number of rounds. While the specific number can vary based on the type of proficiency course taken, the core principle is to meet or exceed the statutory minimums. Accurate calculation ensures compliance with the law, preventing potential issues during the application process. An incorrect approach involves assuming a fixed number of practice rounds, without consulting the specific requirements outlined in the Texas Penal Code or the applicant's training documentation. This fails to account for the nuances of the law and the specific proficiency standards that must be met. Another incorrect approach is to only count rounds fired in a formal LTC course and disregard any subsequent practice, as the law requires demonstration of proficiency within a specific time frame preceding the application, implying ongoing practice is relevant. Finally, an approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or the practice habits of other individuals, rather than the explicit legal requirements, is also professionally unacceptable as it deviates from the objective legal standard. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and objective measurement. This involves 1. Identifying the specific legal requirements for handgun proficiency in Texas. 2. Consulting the applicant's training records and any relevant documentation to determine the exact number of rounds fired within the specified time frame. 3. Performing precise calculations to ensure the minimum statutory requirements are met or exceeded. 4. Documenting the calculation and the basis for it clearly. Question 11. The evaluation methodology shows that a Texas license to carry, LTC, holder Mr. Henderson is attending a community town hall meeting in Austin, Texas, to discuss local public safety concerns. He is aware that the meeting is being held in a publicly accessible community center. Mr. Henderson is concerned about potential disruptions and feels it is prudent to carry his handgun for personal protection. Considering the specific regulations governing LTC holders in Texas, which of the following actions best reflects responsible and lawful conduct? Option A. Mr. Henderson openly displays his handgun on his hip as a visible deterrent to any potential troublemakers, believing his LTC grants him this right. Option B. Mr. Henderson carries his handgun into the community center, even though he knows the center is adjacent to a public elementary school, assuming his LTC exempts him from any proximity restrictions. Option C. Mr. Henderson discreetly carries his handgun concealed, ensuring it is not visible to others, and remains aware of his surroundings throughout the meeting. Option D. Mr. Henderson decides to leave his handgun in his vehicle parked in the community center's lot, believing that carrying it inside a public meeting venue is too risky and could lead to misunderstandings, even though he is legally permitted to carry it concealed. The correct answer is C. Mr. Henderson discreetly carries his handgun concealed, ensuring it is not visible to others, and remains aware of his surroundings throughout the meeting. Explanation: the evaluation methodology shows that this scenario is professionally challenging due to the inherent tension between an individual's right to self-defense and the legal requirements for carrying a handgun in Texas. A license to carry, LTC, holder must exercise constant vigilance and judgment to ensure their actions remain within the bounds of Texas law, particularly concerning the permissible places to carry and the circumstances under which a handgun may be displayed or used. Misinterpreting these nuances can lead to serious legal consequences, including the potential loss of the LTC and criminal charges. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding of Texas Government Code Chapter 411, Subchapter H, License to carry a handgun, and Texas Penal Code Chapter 46, Weapons. Specifically, an LTC holder must be aware of the prohibitions on carrying handguns in certain locations, such as on the premises of a polling place on Election Day, in a correctional facility, or at a high school or collegiate sporting event. Furthermore, the law outlines specific circumstances where a handgun may be displayed, and it is generally unlawful to intentionally display a handgun in plain view of another person in a public place, unless the display is reasonable and necessary for self-defense. The best professional practice is to err on the side of caution and avoid any action that could be construed as a violation, prioritizing discreet carriage, and only considering display or use in situations that clearly meet the legal threshold for self-defense. This involves a continuous assessment of the environment and potential threats, coupled with a deep knowledge of the legal framework governing the LTC. An incorrect approach would be to assume that simply possessing an LTC grants unrestricted carrying privileges in all locations. This fails to acknowledge the statutory limitations on where a handgun can be carried, such as within 1,000 feet of a place of execution of a death sentence, or on the premises of any government court, unless the person is a judge or other authorized official. Another incorrect approach is to believe that an LTC holder has the right to openly display their handgun as a deterrent or to intimidate others. Texas law does not permit the gratuitous display of a handgun. Such actions can be interpreted as unlawful exhibition and lead to legal repercussions. Finally, an approach that relies on personal interpretation of reasonable necessity, without a firm grasp of the legal definitions and case law surrounding self-defense in Texas, is also flawed. This can lead to an unjustified display or use of a handgun, violating the penal code. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a proactive and informed stance. Professionals should regularly review and update their knowledge of Texas LTC laws and relevant case law. They should practice situational awareness to identify potential threats and understand the legal parameters of their actions. When in doubt about the legality of carrying or displaying a handgun in a particular location or circumstance, the safest and most legally sound decision is to refrain from carrying the handgun or to leave the location. The principle of when in doubt, do without is paramount for maintaining legal compliance and personal safety. Question 12. Market research demonstrates that many Texans who obtain a license to carry, LTC, do so with the primary goal of enhancing their personal safety. A Texas LTC holder is attending a community event held at a local high school gymnasium. While the event is open to the public, and the licensee feels a general sense of unease in large crowds, they are unsure if carrying their handgun is permissible in this specific venue. What is the most responsible course of action for the LTC holder in this situation? Option A. Rely on their personal assessment of the safety of the gymnasium and carry the handgun if they feel it is necessary for their protection. Option B. Carry the handgun openly, believing that open carry is a deterrent and that their LTC status makes it permissible in any public venue. Option C. Carry the handgun discreetly, assuming that as an LTC holder, they have the right to carry in most public places and that discretion will prevent any legal issues. Option D. Refrain from carrying the handgun into the high school gymnasium to ensure compliance with Texas law regarding prohibited locations for carrying handguns. The correct answer is D. Refrain from carrying the handgun into the high school gymnasium to ensure compliance with Texas law regarding prohibited locations for carrying handguns. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between a licensee's right to carry a handgun for self-defense and the responsibility to comply with specific Texas statutes that may restrict carrying in certain locations. Even with a license to carry, LTC, the licensee must exercise careful judgment to avoid violating the law, which could lead to criminal charges and the revocation of their LTC. The correct approach involves understanding and adhering to the specific prohibitions outlined in the Texas Government Code, Chapter 411, Subchapter H, which governs the license to carry a handgun. Specifically, Section 411(203) of the Texas Government Code states that a license holder is not required to obtain a permit to carry a handgun, but it does not grant an unrestricted right to carry. The law explicitly prohibits carrying a handgun in certain locations, such as on the premises of a polling place on Election Day, in a correctional facility, or in a high school, college, or professional sporting event. Therefore, a licensee must be aware of and respect these statutory restrictions. When faced with a situation where carrying might be prohibited, the licensee must prioritize legal compliance over the desire to carry. This means refraining from carrying the handgun in locations explicitly forbidden by Texas law, even if they feel it is for personal safety. An incorrect approach would be to assume that having an LTC grants an absolute right to carry a handgun in all public places within Texas, disregarding specific statutory prohibitions. This demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of the Texas License to Carry a Handgun Act and its limitations. Such an assumption could lead to carrying a handgun into a prohibited location, such as a school or a courthouse, resulting in criminal charges and potential LTC revocation. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on personal judgment about the perceived safety of a location, rather than consulting the specific legal restrictions. While personal safety is a primary motivation for obtaining an LTC, the law dictates where carrying is permissible. Ignoring these legal boundaries based on a subjective assessment of risk is a failure to comply with the regulatory framework. A further incorrect approach would be to believe that an LTC holder can carry a handgun into a prohibited location if they are discreet or if no one notices. This demonstrates a disregard for the law and an assumption that enforcement is based on detection rather than the act itself. The law prohibits carrying in these locations, regardless of whether the licensee is observed. The professional decision-making process for similar situations requires a proactive approach to understanding the Texas License to Carry a Handgun Act. This includes thoroughly reviewing the statutory prohibitions and exceptions, staying informed about any legislative changes, and exercising caution when entering any public space. When in doubt about the legality of carrying in a particular location, the safest and most legally sound decision is to err on the side of caution and refrain from carrying the handgun. This prioritizes legal compliance and protects the licensee's rights and privileges. Question 13. The evaluation methodology shows that a Texas resident has applied for a license to carry a handgun, LTC. During the background check, it was discovered that the applicant was involved in a verbal altercation 5 years ago that resulted in a minor physical scuffle. While no charges were filed, and the incident was resolved without a criminal conviction, the applicant admitted to losing their temper significantly during the event. Considering this information, which of the following approaches best reflects the professional and regulatory requirements for processing this LTC application in Texas? Option A. Request a psychological evaluation of the applicant, as any history of losing one's temper, even without a conviction, warrants a professional mental health assessment. Option B. Immediately deny the application based on the applicant's admission of losing their temper significantly, as this indicates a lack of the required judgment and temperament for responsible handgun carry. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of the circumstances surrounding the past altercation, including any documentation available, and assess the applicant's overall conduct and demonstrated temperament since the incident to determine their current suitability for carrying a handgun. Option D. Approve the application without further investigation, as the absence of a criminal conviction means the incident is not a disqualifying factor under Texas law. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough review of the circumstances surrounding the past altercation, including any documentation available, and assess the applicant's overall conduct and demonstrated temperament since the incident to determine their current suitability for carrying a handgun. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that this scenario is professionally challenging due to the inherent tension between an individual's right to self-defense and the legal requirements for carrying a handgun in public spaces in Texas. The applicant's past behavior, while not resulting in a conviction that would automatically disqualify them, raises concerns about their judgment and temperament, which are critical factors for responsible handgun carry. Careful judgment is required to balance the applicant's stated intent with the potential risks associated with their history. The best professional approach involves a thorough review of the applicant's entire history, focusing on the specific circumstances surrounding the past incident, even if it did not lead to a disqualifying conviction. This approach prioritizes adherence to the spirit and letter of Texas Government Code Chapter 411, Subchapter H, which governs the license to carry a handgun. Specifically, requires assessing whether the applicant has demonstrated the necessary judgment and temperament to carry a handgun responsibly, as evidenced by their overall conduct and the resolution of past legal issues. This includes understanding the context of the incident, the outcome, and any subsequent actions taken by the applicant that demonstrate rehabilitation or a change in behavior. The Texas Department of Public Safety, DPS, is tasked with making this determination, and a comprehensive, nuanced review is essential to fulfilling that duty. An approach that dismisses the applicant based solely on the existence of a past incident, regardless of its outcome or the applicant's subsequent conduct, is professionally flawed. It fails to acknowledge that not all past legal entanglements automatically equate to a present inability to exercise responsible handgun carry. Similarly, an approach that focuses only on whether a disqualifying conviction exists, without considering the underlying behavior or the applicant's overall suitability, overlooks the broader mandate of ensuring public safety and responsible firearm ownership. Finally, an approach that relies on anecdotal information or assumptions about the applicant's character, without a diligent investigation into the facts of the past incident and the applicant's current circumstances, is also professionally unacceptable. It risks making a decision based on prejudice rather than evidence. Professionals in this field should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the relevant Texas statutes and administrative rules. This framework involves a multifaceted assessment of the applicant, considering not only their criminal history, but also their overall conduct, the nature of any past incidents, and their demonstrated capacity for responsible decision-making. When past incidents are present, Even without disqualifying convictions, a deeper dive into the specifics is warranted to ascertain the applicant's current suitability. This process requires objective evaluation, a commitment to due diligence, and a focus on the statutory requirements for demonstrating the necessary judgment and temperament for a license to carry. Question 14. The evaluation methodology shows that a Texas resident has applied for a license to carry a handgun, LTC. During the application process, the applicant disclosed a past arrest for assault causing bodily injury, though the charges were later dismissed. The applicant has otherwise maintained a clean record with no convictions. Considering the requirements for obtaining an LTC in Texas, which of the following actions best reflects the appropriate professional response to this information? Option A. Deny the application solely based on the disclosure of an arrest for assault, regardless of the dismissal, to err on the side of caution. Option B. Advise the applicant to withdraw their application and reapply after a significant period has passed, without investigating the specifics of the dismissed charge. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of the arrest record, including any available police reports or court documents related to the dismissed charge, to assess the circumstances and determine if it impacts the applicant's eligibility based on character and temperament. Option D. Immediately approve the application, as the charges were dismissed and therefore do not constitute a conviction, satisfying the basic eligibility criteria. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough review of the arrest record, including any available police reports or court documents related to the dismissed charge, to assess the circumstances and determine if it impacts the applicant's eligibility based on character and temperament. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that this scenario is professionally challenging due to the inherent tension between an individual's right to self-defense and the legal requirements for carrying a handgun in public. The applicant's past behavior, while not resulting in a conviction, raises concerns about their judgment and temperament, which are critical factors in determining suitability for a Texas license to carry, LTC. A thorough and objective assessment is paramount to ensure public safety and uphold the integrity of the LTC program. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of all submitted documentation, including the applicant's self-reported history, and cross-referencing this with available public records and any required background checks. This approach prioritizes adherence to the Texas Government Code, specifically Chapter 411, Subchapter H, which outlines the eligibility requirements for an LTC. This includes a thorough examination of any arrests, even those that did not lead to a conviction, as these can be indicative of potential issues that might disqualify an applicant under the dishonest or unethical character provisions, or if they demonstrate a pattern of behavior that suggests a risk to public safety. The Texas Department of Public Safety, DPS, is mandated to consider such information when making a determination. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the applicant's self-reported arrest history simply because it did not result in a conviction. This fails to acknowledge that the LTC application process requires an assessment of character and suitability, not just a clean criminal record. The Texas Government Code allows for the denial of an LTC if an applicant has been arrested for certain offenses, regardless of conviction, if the circumstances suggest a propensity for violence or a lack of good judgment. Another incorrect approach would be to grant the license solely based on the absence of a conviction, without further investigation into the circumstances of the arrest. This bypasses the due diligence required by the DPS to ensure the safety of the public. Finally, an approach that relies on personal assumptions or biases about the applicant's character, rather than objective evidence and regulatory guidelines, is fundamentally flawed and unethical. Professionals in this field should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the relevant Texas statutes and DPS rules. They must then objectively evaluate all submitted information, conduct necessary background checks, and consider the totality of the circumstances surrounding any reported incidents. The focus should always be on whether the applicant meets the statutory requirements for character and temperament, ensuring that the issuance of an LTC does not pose an undue risk to public safety. Question 15. Regulatory review indicates that a Texas license to carry a handgun, LTC holder is lawfully carrying a handgun in a restaurant. The owner of the restaurant, who is not a licensed peace officer, verbally instructs the LTC holder to conceal their handgun, stating, "I don't want guns in my establishment." The restaurant is not a location specifically prohibited by Texas Penal Code Chapter 46 for LTC holders, and there is no signage posted that meets the requirements of Texas Penal Code Section 30.06 or 30.07. What is the most appropriate course of action for the LTC holder? Option A. Assume the owner's verbal request is sufficient to prohibit carry and leave the premises immediately. Option B. Immediately conceal the handgun and comply with the owner's request to avoid any potential issues. Option C. Argue with the owner, asserting their right to carry and refusing to conceal the handgun. Option D. Politely inform the owner of their LTC status and the legal provisions allowing them to carry in that location. And if the owner insists, consider leaving to avoid further conflict. Correct answer is D. Politely inform the owner of their LTC status and the legal provisions allowing them to carry in that location. And if the owner insists, consider leaving to avoid further conflict. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance their personal rights and responsibilities with the legal obligations imposed by the Texas License to Carry a Handgun (LTC) Act. The core of the challenge lies in accurately interpreting and applying the provisions of the Act concerning the carrying of handguns in specific locations, particularly when faced with ambiguous signage or verbal directives that may not align with established legal exceptions. Careful judgment is required to avoid both the unlawful carrying of a handgun and the potential infringement of one's own rights. The best professional approach involves a thorough understanding of Texas Penal Code, Chapter 46, specifically the sections detailing prohibited places and exceptions for LTC holders. This approach prioritizes adherence to the law by recognizing that a verbal directive from a private property owner or employee, while potentially creating a difficult social situation, does not automatically override the statutory exceptions granted to LTC holders. The individual should politely inform the individual issuing the directive of their LTC status and the relevant legal provisions that permit them to carry in that location, assuming it is not a statutorily prohibited place, e.g., a polling place on election day, a correctional facility, a courthouse. If the property owner insists, the individual should then consider their options, which may include leaving the premises to avoid further conflict, but not necessarily relinquishing their right to carry, if legally permitted. This approach is correct because it directly applies the Texas Penal Code, which is the governing legal framework. It respects the rights of the LTC holder while also acknowledging the property rights of the owner, seeking a resolution through legal understanding rather than immediate capitulation or confrontation. An incorrect approach would be to immediately conceal the handgun or leave the premises solely based on a verbal request from a private property owner, even if the location is not statutorily prohibited for LTC holders. This fails to recognize the legal protections afforded by the LTC and could lead to the unnecessary relinquishment of a lawful right. Another incorrect approach would be to argue aggressively or refuse to leave if asked, even after politely asserting one's rights. While the individual may be legally permitted to carry, Texas law does allow private property owners to ask individuals to leave their property. Refusal to leave after being lawfully asked can constitute criminal trespass, regardless of LTC status. A third incorrect approach would be to assume that any sign prohibiting firearms automatically applies to LTC holders, even if the sign does not meet the specific requirements outlined in the Texas Penal Code for prohibiting carry by LTC holders, e.g., proper signage under Texas Penal Code 30.06 or 30.07. The professional decision-making process in such situations should begin with a clear understanding of the Texas Penal Code regarding prohibited places and exceptions for LTC holders. When encountering a potentially conflicting situation, the individual should first assess the location against the statutory prohibitions. If the location is not statutorily prohibited, they should then consider any signage, ensuring it meets the legal requirements for prohibiting carry by LTC holders. If a verbal directive is received, the individual should calmly and politely assert their LTC status and the relevant legal provisions. If the property owner insists, the individual must then weigh the desire to exercise their right against the potential for further conflict or legal ramifications, such as criminal trespass, and make a decision that best balances their rights with legal compliance and personal safety. Question 16. Performance analysis shows that a Texas license to carry, LTC, holder is attending a local school board meeting held at the high school gymnasium. The individual has their handgun concealed on their person and no explicit signage prohibiting firearms is present at the entrance to the gymnasium. Considering Texas Penal Code Chapter 46, what is the most appropriate course of action for this LTC holder? Option A. Carry the handgun into the gymnasium but remain discreet and avoid drawing attention, as the primary concern of the law is overt display of a firearm. Option B. Avoid entering the gymnasium with a handgun, as a high school is a statutorily prohibited location for carrying a handgun under Texas law, regardless of signage or the specific event being held. Option C. Carry the handgun into the gymnasium, assuming that as a licensed carrier attending a public meeting, they are exempt from prohibitions related to school premises. Option D. Proceed into the gymnasium with a handgun, as the absence of explicit signage means carrying is permitted, and the meeting is a civic event, not a school-sponsored activity. The correct answer is B. Avoid entering the gymnasium with a handgun, as a high school is a statutorily prohibited location for carrying a handgun under Texas law, regardless of signage or the specific event being held. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance their right to carry a handgun in Texas with the responsibility to act lawfully and ethically in a public space. The core of the challenge lies in interpreting and applying Texas Penal Code Chapter 46, specifically concerning places where carrying a handgun is prohibited, and understanding the nuances of lawful possession versus unlawful carrying. The individual must make a judgment call based on their understanding of the law and the specific circumstances, which can be complex and have significant legal ramifications if misinterpreted. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves understanding and adhering strictly to the Texas Penal Code regarding prohibited locations for carrying a handgun. This means recognizing that even with a license to carry, LTC, certain premises are off-limits unless specific exceptions apply. The correct approach is to proactively identify and avoid carrying a handgun into any location explicitly listed as prohibited under Texas law, such as a polling place on Election Day, the premises of a high school, professional sporting event, correctional facility, or within 1,000 feet of a place where a punishment, penalty, or sentence for the commission of a felony is carried out. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the statutory prohibitions outlined in Texas Penal Code Section 46.03 and Section 46.035, which are designed to enhance public safety in sensitive areas. Adhering to these prohibitions ensures lawful possession and avoids potential criminal charges. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that having a Texas license to carry, LTC, grants unrestricted carrying privileges in all public spaces. This fails to acknowledge the specific statutory exceptions and prohibitions detailed in the Texas Penal Code. Texas LTC does not supersede the explicit prohibition against carrying handguns in certain locations, and ignorance of these specific prohibitions is not a legal defense. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on the absence of visible signage prohibiting handguns. While signage is important for certain offenses, like carrying on the premises of a business that derives 51% or more of its income from the sale of alcoholic beverages for on-premises consumption under Section 46.035c, it is not a prerequisite for prohibition in many other locations listed in Section 46.03. For example, carrying a handgun into a polling place on Election Day is prohibited regardless of signage. A third incorrect approach is to interpret lawful possession as a broad permission to carry a handgun anywhere as long as it is not actively being used in a threatening manner. Texas law defines unlawful carrying of a handgun based on location and circumstances, not solely on intent or immediate use. The focus is on where the handgun is carried, and if that location is statutorily prohibited, the act is unlawful. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Texas who are licensed to carry a handgun must adopt a proactive and informed approach. This involves a thorough understanding of Texas Penal Code Chapter 46, particularly sections detailing prohibited places and the exceptions to those prohibitions. When faced with uncertainty about a location, the safest and most professional course of action is to err on the side of caution and either leave the handgun secured elsewhere or refrain from entering the premises. Continuous education on legal updates and specific case law related to handgun carry is also crucial for maintaining compliance and ensuring responsible firearm ownership. Question 17. The control framework reveals that Mr. Henderson, a Texas resident, is applying to renew his license to carry a handgun, LTC. He recently completed a sentence for a misdemeanor conviction that involved a dispute within his household. He is concerned about whether this conviction will affect his renewal. Which of the following actions best represents a compliant and prudent course of action for Mr. Henderson? Option A. Mr. Henderson should proceed with the renewal without mentioning the conviction, believing that the DPS will not discover a misdemeanor conviction from several years ago. Option B. Mr. Henderson should proactively disclose the misdemeanor conviction to the Texas Department of Public Safety, DPS, during the renewal process and provide any relevant court documentation that clarifies the nature of the offense and its disposition. Option C. Mr. Henderson should assume that because the offense was a misdemeanor and not a felony, it has no bearing on his LTC renewal and therefore requires no disclosure. Option D. Mr. Henderson should omit the misdemeanor conviction from his renewal application, assuming that only felony convictions impact LTC eligibility. The correct answer is B. Mr. Henderson should proactively disclose the misdemeanor conviction to the Texas Department of Public Safety, DPS, during the renewal process and provide any relevant court documentation that clarifies the nature of the offense and its disposition. Explanation. The control framework reveals a scenario where a Texas resident, Mr. Henderson, is seeking to renew his license to carry a handgun, LTC. He has recently been convicted of a misdemeanor offense that, while not a felony, could potentially impact his eligibility. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of Texas Penal Code provisions related to handgun licensing and the specific criteria that disqualify an applicant, even for a renewal. The challenge lies in distinguishing between offenses that automatically disqualify an applicant and those that might require further review or have specific time limitations. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with Texas Government Code Chapter 411, Subchapter H, which governs LTCs. The best professional approach involves Mr. Henderson proactively disclosing the misdemeanor conviction to the Texas Department of Public Safety, DPS, during the renewal process and providing any relevant court documentation that clarifies the nature of the offense and its disposition. This approach is correct because Texas Government Code Section 411-187 mandates that an applicant for an LTC must meet certain eligibility requirements, and Section 411-172 outlines disqualifying factors. While a misdemeanor conviction itself doesn't automatically disqualify an applicant for renewal, the DPS has the authority to review any conviction to determine if it falls under the disqualifying categories, such as those involving family violence or certain moral turpitude offenses. As defined in Texas Penal Code, proactive disclosure allows the DPS to make an informed decision based on all available facts, preventing potential issues later. An incorrect approach would be for Mr. Henderson to omit the misdemeanor conviction from his renewal application, hoping it goes unnoticed. This is a regulatory failure because Texas Government Code Section 411-187A.1 requires an applicant to provide truthful information on the application. Knowingly omitting material information constitutes a false statement, which can lead to denial of the renewal and potential penalties. Another incorrect approach would be for Mr. Henderson to assume that because the offense was a misdemeanor and not a felony, it has no bearing on his LTC renewal. This is an ethical and regulatory failure because Texas law does not limit disqualifications solely to felonies. Certain misdemeanors can also be disqualifying, and the DPS is tasked with evaluating these. Relying on a personal interpretation of the law without consulting official channels or providing complete information is professionally unsound. The professional reasoning process for individuals in Mr. Henderson's situation should involve 1. Understanding the specific requirements and potential disqualifications outlined in Texas Government Code Chapter 411, Subchapter H, and relevant sections of the Texas Penal Code. 2. Recognizing that the renewal process is not merely administrative and requires continued eligibility. 3. Prioritizing transparency and full disclosure when interacting with regulatory bodies like the Texas DPS. 4. Seeking clarification from the DPS or legal counsel if there is any doubt about the impact of a past conviction on LTC eligibility. Question 18. Stakeholder feedback indicates a need for clearer guidance on navigating private property restrictions for license to carry holders in Texas. A Texas LTC holder is attending a community event held at a private park. Upon arrival, they notice a sign at the entrance stating, "No handguns allowed." The individual is legally licensed to carry a handgun in Texas and believes their license grants them the right to carry on the premises. What is the most appropriate course of action for the LTC holder in this situation? Option A. Carry the handgun concealed into the event, believing the license overrides the signage. Option B. Proceed into the event with the handgun openly displayed, asserting their right to carry. Option C. Secure the handgun in their vehicle and attend the event unarmed. Option D. Argue with the event organizers about the validity of the signage based on their LTC. The correct answer is C. Secure the handgun in their vehicle and attend the event unarmed. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to balance their right to carry a handgun with the responsibility to ensure public safety and adhere to specific legal requirements. The challenge lies in interpreting and applying Texas Penal Code provisions regarding where a handgun may be legally carried, especially in situations that might be ambiguous or involve private property with posted signage. Misinterpreting these rules can lead to legal consequences and compromise the safety of others. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves understanding and strictly adhering to the Texas Penal Code, specifically Chapter 46, which governs the carrying of handguns. This includes recognizing that private property owners can prohibit the carrying of handguns on their premises, even if the individual possesses a valid Texas license to carry, LTC. The correct approach is to respect the posted signage prohibiting handguns, as this constitutes notice that carrying a handgun on the property is forbidden. Texas Penal Code Section 30.06 clearly outlines the legal ramifications of carrying a handgun on a property where notice has been given that handgun carry is prohibited. Therefore, leaving the handgun secured in the vehicle is the legally compliant and professionally responsible action. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that a valid Texas LTC overrides private property signage prohibiting handguns. This fails to acknowledge the rights of private property owners to set their own rules regarding firearms on their premises, as established by Texas law. Carrying a handgun after receiving such notice would be a violation of Texas Penal Code Section 30.06. Another incorrect approach is to attempt to conceal the handgun and proceed into the establishment, believing that discovery is unlikely or that the signage does not apply if the handgun is not openly displayed. This is a direct violation of the notice provided by the signage and Texas Penal Code Section 30.06, which prohibits carrying a handgun regardless of concealment after notice has been given. It also demonstrates a disregard for the property owner's rights and potentially creates a dangerous situation. A third incorrect approach is to confront the establishment's management about the signage, arguing for the right to carry based on the LTC. While understanding the law is important, challenging a property owner's lawful right to prohibit handguns on their private property is not the appropriate course of action and could lead to being asked to leave or facing legal repercussions if the handgun is carried onto the premises. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Texas seeking to exercise their right to carry a handgun must adopt a proactive and informed approach. This involves thoroughly understanding the Texas Penal Code, particularly Chapter 46, and staying updated on any changes before entering any establishment, especially those with potentially ambiguous rules or signage. Individuals should exercise due diligence by looking for specific prohibitions. When in doubt, or when clear signage is present, the safest and most legally sound decision is to err on the side of caution and comply with the property owner's directives, which may include securing the handgun in a vehicle. This demonstrates respect for the law, property rights, and the safety of the community. Question 19. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of an applicant misunderstanding the nuances of Texas Penal Code Chapter 46 regarding prohibited locations for carrying a handgun, despite demonstrating basic marksmanship. As a licensed Texas LTC instructor, how should you proceed with this applicant? Option A. Proceed with certification based on their demonstrated marksmanship, assuming they will research the laws further on their own time. Option B. Focus the remainder of the training solely on advanced shooting techniques, believing that a skilled shooter is less likely to misuse a firearm. Option C. Conduct a detailed review of Texas Penal Code Chapter 46, focusing on prohibited locations and the legal justification for carrying a handgun, using scenario-based questions to assess comprehension before certifying proficiency. Option D. Inform the applicant that their understanding of the law is insufficient and terminate the training session without further instruction. The correct answer is C. Conduct a detailed review of Texas Penal Code Chapter 46, focusing on prohibited locations and the legal justification for carrying a handgun, using scenario-based questions to assess comprehension before certifying proficiency. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the applicant's stated intent for carrying a handgun with the instructor's responsibility to ensure the applicant understands and can adhere to the legal and ethical responsibilities associated with carrying a concealed handgun in Texas. The instructor must assess not just the applicant's ability to shoot, but their understanding of the laws and the gravity of carrying a weapon. The best approach involves a thorough assessment of the applicant's understanding of Texas Penal Code Chapter 46, specifically focusing on the lawful places to carry and the circumstances under which deadly force may be justified. This includes verifying the applicant's knowledge of prohibited locations, the legal definition of reasonable belief regarding threats, and the duty to retreat when applicable. This approach is correct because Texas Government Code Section 411-188 requires an applicant to demonstrate proficiency in the use of a handgun and knowledge of handgun laws. The instructor's role is to ensure this knowledge is not only present, but understood in practical terms, aligning with the spirit of the law which aims to license responsible citizens. An incorrect approach would be to solely focus on the applicant's marksmanship skills, without adequately probing their understanding of the legal ramifications of carrying a handgun. This fails to meet the statutory requirement of demonstrating knowledge of handgun laws. Another incorrect approach would be to overlook the applicant's stated intent if it seems questionable, such as carrying for personal protection in a manner that suggests a misunderstanding of lawful self-defense principles. This neglects the instructor's ethical duty to ensure the applicant is prepared to act lawfully and responsibly. Finally, assuming the applicant's prior experience or general knowledge is sufficient without direct assessment is also a failure, as it bypasses the mandated proficiency and knowledge demonstration. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical responsibility. This involves a structured evaluation process that covers both practical skills and theoretical knowledge, with a particular emphasis on the legal and ethical dimensions of carrying a handgun. The instructor should actively engage the applicant in discussions that test their comprehension of the Texas Penal Code and their ability to apply these laws to realistic scenarios, ensuring they grasp the significant responsibilities involved. Question 20. Operational review demonstrates that a Texas license to carry (LTC) instructor is preparing to train a new applicant. The applicant has provided a certificate showing they successfully completed 2 hours of handgun proficiency training from a certified instructor 18 months ago. The Texas Government Code, Chapter 411, Subchapter H, mandates a minimum of 4 hours of instruction for an LTC, which includes both classroom and handgun proficiency components. If the applicant's prior training is deemed equivalent and can be credited towards the total required hours, what is the minimum additional instruction time in hours that this applicant must complete to be eligible for an LTC in Texas? Option A, 6 hours. Option B, 4 hours. Option C, 0 hours. Option D, 2 hours. The correct answer is D, 2 hours. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Texas license to carry LTC instructor because it requires the accurate calculation of required training hours based on specific statutory provisions, while also considering the practical implications of a student's prior training. Misinterpreting the Texas Government Code regarding handgun proficiency requirements can lead to incorrect course duration, potentially violating state law and failing to adequately prepare the student. The instructor must balance the need for comprehensive training with the recognition of valid prior experience. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a precise calculation of the minimum required classroom instruction and handgun proficiency instruction hours, as stipulated by the Texas Government Code, Chapter 411, Subchapter H. Specifically, the law mandates a minimum of 4 to 6 hours of instruction, which includes both classroom and handgun proficiency components. When a student presents proof of prior handgun training that meets statutory equivalency requirements, e.g., a certificate from a certified instructor or proof of military service, the instructor must assess if this prior training can substitute for portions of the required instruction. The Texas Government Code allows for the waiver of certain components if equivalent training is demonstrated. In this case, the student has completed 2 hours of handgun proficiency training. The total minimum required instruction is 4 hours. Therefore, the instructor must ensure the student completes at least an additional 2 hours of instruction, which can be classroom or proficiency, or a combination thereof, to meet the minimum 4-hour requirement. This approach directly adheres to the statutory minimums and allows for the proper crediting of prior, equivalent training, ensuring compliance and efficient use of training time. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to simply add the student's prior training to the standard course duration without verifying if the prior training meets the statutory equivalency requirements for substitution. This could lead to overtraining and unnecessary cost for the student, and it fails to acknowledge the legislative intent to allow for credit of equivalent prior experience. Another incorrect approach is to assume that any prior handgun training automatically fulfills a portion of the required hours without proper documentation or assessment. This could result in a student receiving an LTC without having met the minimum proficiency and safety standards mandated by Texas law, creating a potential safety risk and violating the spirit of the LTC program. A further incorrect approach is to require the student to complete the full standard course duration regardless of their prior training, even if that prior training is demonstrably equivalent. This ignores the provisions within the Texas Government Code that allow for the crediting of prior, equivalent training, and it is an inefficient and potentially unfair practice. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes strict adherence to the Texas Government Code, Chapter 411, Subchapter H, while also exercising sound judgment in assessing prior training. This involves 1. Understanding the minimum statutory requirements for classroom and proficiency instruction. 2. Establishing clear criteria for accepting proof of prior handgun training as equivalent. 3. Performing a precise calculation to determine the remaining required instruction time after crediting valid prior training. 4. Communicating transparently with the student about the process and the remaining requirements. This systematic approach ensures legal compliance, student satisfaction, and the integrity of the LTC program.